All right, so tonight I'm talking about, uh, thank you, Joan, for asking, preparing for death. Like, how do you prepare for death? And of course, I'll be speaking about this a lot from a Buddhist perspective because that's been my conditioning and that's been my practice with working with death and all the practices that I've done. And I also want to give a disclaimer that I am not an expert on death, that I obviously don't know everything about death. And the other thing I wanted to say is that everybody has a different um, practice with death. So what works for me may not work for you, and that I'm going to be throwing out a lot of suggestions, but for you to find what works for you in your preparations for the ultimate departure. Um, yeah. So I want to start with a quote by Traleg Kaya Bagan Rinpoche, who said, "For all these reasons, the ever-present fear of death and our lack of contact with it, it is all the more important to have a proper encounter with the facts of death and to deal with the fear of death. Because from the Buddhist point of view, coming to terms with death is part of making our lives worthwhile and meaningful." You hear that? Coming to terms with death is part of making our lives worthwhile and meaningful. That is such an interesting and worthy perspective because I found that to be my own experience. A lot of people, obviously, in our society feel that they need to avoid death. And, my dad often he'll like to talk about death with me. He postulates this is going to happen, that's going to happen. And we just sit there and I say, well, we really don't know what's going to happen. But anyhow, we have fun talking about it. And my mother goes absolutely nuts. She says, "Don't talk about death around me. I don't want to hear this morbid obsession you two have." So she has a lot of resistance to the whole concept of death. And when I asked her one day, why do you not want to talk about death? She said, "It makes me nervous. It makes me anxious." Um, and I didn't say this to her, but it sounds like she's got a lot of fear around death and dying, which is really normal, right? It's a normal human experience. We don't know the truth is, we don't know when we're going to die. We don't know how we're going to die. We don't know if it's going to be pleasant or wonderful experience. So this part of my I'm going to be talking about my process and journey with learning to be with death. Part of my process was to join hospice as a volunteer. And for 5 years, I was a bedside volunteer, sitting with people who were dying once a week. I'd go visit them. And I learned a lot by watching and being with and supporting and loving people when they were going through their dying process. And the one main thing I've learned was that people tend to die the way that they lived, right? So, what do I mean by that? The man who was sitting there talking about how much he loved his children, how much he appreciated his grandchildren, what a beautiful experiences the births of his children were, the beautiful, wonderful boss he had at work, how he loved giving to all the people at Lowe's that he worked at. He had so much gratitude and love and caring, and he never said a negative word about anybody, and his heart was filled with love as he was going through his dying process. And it was very pleasant to visit him, and he was happy even though he was struggling to breathe and struggling to with his body letting go. He was in some pain too, but he was happy. And the day that he died, I went to go visit him. He was in a lot of pain. He had some back pain, shoulder pain. He said, "Can you please do a healing on me? Because that always helps." And I said, "Sure." And I was put my hands and I was doing my healing work on him. He said, "Can you help me learn to let go when you're healing?" And I was like, okay. So I was just giving him letting go energy. And then after about 15 minutes, I stopped. He had a big smile on his face, and he told me what a darling I was. He was so sweet. Um, yeah, and his wife was the opposite. She was complaining about every single thing. But it didn't let him bother. It didn't bother him. But anyhow, he just said some really kind things to me. Told me how wonderful I've been. Thank you so much. I left, and 2 hours later, his wife called me and said he passed away. About an hour after I left. So, but then I sat with other people who were sitting there worrying about everything that they can imagine, worrying about their children, worrying about the money, worrying about their house, worrying about the car, who's going to get the car, complaining about this, complaining about that. And they seemed to just get more and more negative and more fearful as the time went on. And they were agitated. They weren't, as their bodies started shutting, they were much more agitated. So I just noticed these patterns that, how we're living is going to dictate how we approach our death. So this whole thing that the Buddhist teachings about life being part of living a full life in order to help us have a great death is really important. I know that David Chernikoff, he came and stayed with me a few days before. He's a Buddhist teacher, and he's really studied death, and he gives a lot of classes and courses on death. And he taught at Naropa University, and one of his main topics was preparing for death. And he said, what's really important in preparing for death is to have a good example of someone who dies well. And he told me the story about this Jewish rabbi man who he would go visit every day, as he was, not every day, but every week, the last few years of his life, and then more often as he was dying. And this Jewish rabbi talked to him about his dying process, about his letting go process. He was curious. He was looking forward to the transition. He saw the dying process as an exciting adventure, right? So that he could find out what was actually going to happen. There are all these theories. We have every religion telling us this is going to happen, that's going to happen, this. And we're sitting there going, well, how do they know that? They're all still here on this side with me. Where are they getting this, information from? So the human mind is like, really? I don't know. The truth is, we don't know what's going to happen. But there's something amazingly meaningful and significant about the fact that our life, this brief life that we have, is sandwiched between birth and death, right? Birth and death. It's an important part of the whole journey, the whole process. And there's really nothing surprisingly, we sit there and go, well, our society really loves births. We celebrate births, and we buy all these gifts coming up to a birth, and then our society tends to mourn death. Like, there's a lot of mourning and sadness, and yeah, we have to grieve those that have gone. But I love now that a lot of people are doing life celebrations instead of funerals for people. They're celebrating the life of people that have existed. So instead of having this morbid, grieving perspective about death, like, is something wrong? If we have this idea that there's something wrong and it's not desired, it's not wanted, it's bad for death to happen, instead of the fact that it's natural. It's just as natural as birth, right? Death is just as natural. And life is freaking miraculous. If you've noticed, right? And this whole being born and changing and dying process is happening every minute of the day. When we start practicing mindfulness and we start doing this present moment of awareness, non-judgmental present moment awareness, we start to see the beginnings and endings and beginnings and endings and beginnings and endings of each sensation, each breath, each emotion, each mood, that nothing is static. Nothing, everything's constantly changing, right? Here's Thich Nhat Hanh, famous Vietnamese teacher. He said the true miracle. Someone said that the cause of death is birth, and I just thought that was kind of funny. That's
Ronya, the audio isn't working, at least on my end.
can you hear
Perhaps,
me? Yeah,
okay.
error of it.
She froze.
Mute that. Or in terror of it. Hear me okay? I'm still here, right? Can you see me? I see you. Wave your hands. Okay, great. Anyhow, so in Buddhism, it's taught that dying is a precious process. And it's because it's confronted with life's deepest truths when we're on our deathbed. The deepest truth of who we've been in our life, how we've lived our life, the relationships we've created, the karma we've created. It's all right there for us to see. We can't escape it. And to be able to learn and be transformed by these truths is one of the most ultimate tasks of one's spiritual practice. Right? We can either go through life in total reaction to life, right? This is assuming that we have the resources to deal with life. I want to make that clear. Not everyone has the resources to live a happy and comfortable life. Some people are really struggling with certain issues. Yeah. So but those of us who have the opportunity to meditate and reflect and live a spiritual life and have a spiritual perspective, that's our task, is to really say, what is this life about? What is this? And who am I going to be in this life? I don't know why I'm here. I don't know what this deal is. Really, we can make up a bunch of stuff, but so we can decide who we want to be during this life, what we want to bring to this life. We can heal past traumas to the best of our ability, so that they don't confront us day after day after day. So that Buddhism encourages people to prepare for death by living a mindful, conscientious, meaningful, caring life. Right? Like that man who died with gratitude and with joy, versus the woman who was screaming at me to get the hell out of her room. Yeah. I mean, I've seen a lot. So practicing mindfulness is a way to lessen your fear of death if you have fear of death, right? Because when we're practicing mindfulness, it reduces fear, period. If you're meditating regularly, practicing mindfulness regularly, your fear level starts to go down, your anxiety level starts to go down naturally. Yeah, so, and mindfulness will help us enliven those seeds that I was talking about, those inner qualities that help bring us equanimity and joy and peace, inner peace. Concentration, that focusing on one object while we're meditating on our breath or the body movement, calms the reactive mind down, stabilizes the mind, so that if we're in our dying process and we feel that the mind is getting a little freaked out, we can start meditating. We can start practicing concentration meditation during that time to bring calm and, gratitude. We can bring our gratitude practice. We can bring our loving kindness practice to our death process if we're aware. It's said in Buddhism that how you die, the moment of your death, the state of your mind during your death, is going to get passed on to the next life. That's like supposedly the most powerful time, is at your death. Your state of your mind when you're dying is what karmically is most powerful. I don't know if that's true, but I know that all this meditating I'm doing, hopefully I'll be able to bring this stability of mind to the dying process when I realize that it's the transition. But think about it. During the meditation, you are aware of the beginning, middle, and ending of each experience. So life is a constant state of transitions. You look at anything on this planet, it's in transition. I'll never forget in high school when I learned about entropy, that everything is in the state of degradation, state of decline. I was like, what? Everything's born, then it starts to decline, then it's gone. Everything, from a rock to a tree to whatever we can touch on in this earthly realm. So our departure as well, when we meditate, we tap into the unconditioned, that which cannot be born, that which cannot die. We start to experience our true nature, that which is interconnected with all life forms. That is that which feels at times like love, that which feels sometimes like creativity, that which feels interconnected to all beings, that which also at times feels empty of all of these mental labels and identities and perspectives that we throw on things. So when we can sit and watch all this with mindfulness, we let go of the strong sense of self, right? And when we let go of the strong sense of self, the fear of death starts to immediately lessen, right? Then as the fear of death is lessening and we're much more open to the arisings and passing away of each experience, we touch into this unconditioned, our true nature, which is a beautiful experience. And, it's hard to describe, but if you've touched into it, that keeps bringing you back to meditation or the promise of it. But eventually, keep meditating, you will start to experience that which doesn't change, that which is not born, the unconditioned, our true nature of who we are. And so the more we touch into the unconditioned in our daily lives, the less fearful we are of transitioning, because we know that that's our true nature. That's going to continue as we transition. That maybe this mind, this body will cease to exist, but awareness of the unconditioned awareness of whatever is arising and passing away never dies. When I'm on meditation retreats, I'm aware of my dreams arising, changing, and passing away. I'm aware of falling asleep. I'm aware of waking up. I'm aware of the different states of mind and body that are constantly changing. I'm aware of when I'm stuck more in the physical, when I'm more in the unconditioned, and back between the conditioned and unconditioned. And um, so my fear of death has lessened because I feel like it's just going to, intuitively, I feel like it's just going to be a continuation of awareness of whatever's arising, whatever's passing away. And honestly, I am really curious. And I'm really looking forward. Not that I want to hasten my departure, but I am kind of excited and looking forward to being fully present during that time because I want to experience the full breadth of the transition, whatever that is. I've never seen anyone personally die, but I've talked to other hospice volunteers who have, and they say that people often say things like, "Oh, this is so beautiful," or big smile on their face right before they take their last breath. So I don't know what people are experiencing that makes them smile, but it sounds pretty good to me, right? Yeah. The Buddha said, "You too shall pass away. Knowing this, how can you quarrel?" You can't hear me? You can hear me? Okay. Yeah, you too shall pass away. Knowing this, how can you quarrel? We are each human beings. We're subject to birth. We're subject to suffering. We're subject to challenges in life. And we're all subject to death. How can we possibly fight or hate another person who's subject to these same things? And then another Buddhist quote by Buddha is, "Even death is not to be feared by one who has lived wisely." Right? Once again, live wisely. It's a recipe for having a pleasant, that's to me, the best thing I can do to prepare for death is to transform this mind, yeah, and live very wisely and kindly. Yeah, so here's Larry Rosenberg has written a book about death, and he has some death awareness practices. Now, what I did is, I'll read his and then I'll tell you what I've done. First thing he says, and I can copy this into, why don't I do that into the chat box? See if it works. All right. So it's in the chat box if you want to look in the chat box. So in A, he says, if you want to do these reflections, you want to be aware of the inevitability of death, and just sit down and reflect. You might have these written down. Reflect on the fact that every single human being must die. Every living thing must die. Take a few, moments or seconds to reflect that. Then reflect that our lifespan is decreasing every minute. Each minute that we're alive, that's less that we have to live. Reflect that the time for developing our minds is small. In other words, reflect that our time to purify our minds and our hearts is lessening each day. Awareness of the time of death. B is reflecting that human life expectancy is uncertain. So reflect on the fact that we don't know when we're going to die. We don't know how long we're going to live. Reflecting that the human body is fragile. We live in these incredibly fragile human bodies that need a certain amount of oxygen and water and food, and if they're injured, Soft belly, soft bodies are injured very easily. So reflect on that. Reflect on the awareness that only insight into the Dharma can help us at the time of death. So that's just basically mindfulness into the insight into impermanence, anicca, that everything is constantly changing, arising, passing away. Reflecting that our possessions and enjoyments can't help. We can't bring them with us. Reflecting that our loved ones can't help. This is something we do alone. And reflecting that our own body cannot help. That's a lot of reflecting. One thing that I did for a few years was I reflected each morning. My practice was to say, today is the day that I could die. It started with that, and it felt kind of morbid at first, but after a while I was like, today would be a good day to die. It started changing as I did this practice. I probably won't die, but I may die today, right? So what does that do? I had an experience years ago. I used to get intuitive information while I was meditating. I still do sometimes, but I was meditating. It would come to me through a voice that I'd hear talking to me. And I was deep in meditation one day, and this voice came through, clear as a bell. Ronya, you're going to die in a few months. And I was like, what? And there was no other, that was it. You're going to die in a few months. I have to tell you, those were the best few months of my life, because I was like, oh no, I'm going to die. I'm not going to be able to see my kids anymore. They were teenagers at the time. So I started just loving them. Fear started going through and saying, well, how am I going to die? When am I going to die? What's going to happen? But then I'm like, well, let go of all that, and maybe this won't even happen. But just in case it's going to happen, really try to be as present as you can be, right? And I said what needed to be said to people. I appreciated those that needed to be appreciated. And I was fully present with everyone in my relationships, because I thought this could be it. This could be the end. That was such a powerful experience that after I didn't die, I was like, whoa. And I had read and studied about Buddhism, and the bringing the reflection that I'm going to die, we're all going to die, life is very temporary, life is temporary. So I started waking up each morning for a long time saying, today may be the day that I die. Other people do other reflections that feel right for them, like life is impermanent, we're all going to die, the body is impermanent, it's going to die. Whatever works for you. Yeah. So sometimes this life can be rather challenging, and other times it can be amazingly beautiful. And when we show up, when we're mindful and we're fully present, it is amazing. Each moment is just spectacular. I know that sounds goofy, but when we're fully here, we never experience any moment the same as the moment before. Each moment is totally different, totally new. Arising, oh my gosh, gone. Arising, oh my gosh. Whatever it is. So that's the promise of this practice. But it, unfortunately, can be rather challenging at the first several years, as we're purifying a lot of old negative pain and trauma. But it's certainly worth it. It's certainly worth it. Yeah. So how prepared are you to die? What really matters to you most? What is your highest aspiration? Are you living your life as if your aspiration could come true, right? Have you loved well? Is the world a better place because you were in it? And how present are you being for each moment that you get to have on this earth, this crazy round ball flying around? So life is a gift. And preparing for death helps us realize just how much of a gift it is, right? It's precious and it's limited. Here's a poem by The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry. It's one of my favorites. When despair grows in me and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting for their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world, and I am free. So thank you for listening. I appreciate all of you. So I'm curious.